In alhamdulillah, wa salat, wa salam ala wa rasulullah. I'd like to welcome everybody to our ongoing series of the Muslim 2.0 with brother Yusuf Zucovsky. You don't want to miss this class. Just like I see the views that we got from the last session last week, we talked about the 2.0 Muslim of the Gulf. Well, tonight we're going to speak about how to identify the 2.0 Muslim here in America, made in the USA. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to brother Yusuf, and let's get started.
But in America, we're going to explain a lot of the history, particularly the racial division, in this country and how that's being used against the Muslim community. So I hope you guys enjoy it and really, can find some, very good comfort in these facts, and also being able to spot some of the deviants that have been planted, if you will, in our midst to sow the seeds of division. So as we're going to begin, busy news week, as we always do, starting off with news, going as the order that I witnessed it this week as I jotted it down. We had a protest across the country, going back to our illegal issue a couple of weeks ago, when I explained how this illegal immigration is a detriment to us all. And we looked at numbers and statistics. We talked a little bit about who a lot of these illegals are and the problems they bring to the society. Well, they were all over the country, particularly in liberal cities as usual, because they know that nothing's going to happen to them there. I mean, they can do this in LA, they can do this in San Diego, they can do this in Washington State, Seattle in particular. They can do this in parts of Georgia. Because again, they know that none of these Democrat mayors or police departments are really going to do anything to them. And as usual, they're flying what? Mexican flags. They just can't help themselves, can they? And I hope this is, again, another lesson, to a lot of Americans out there when they hear the stories from the left and the Democratic Party, as these people are searching the American dream. They love being American. They want to be your neighbor. They want to be your brother. I mean, that's couldn't be farther from truth. They're hoisting these flags, waving them around, chanting racial abuse to people of all colors, to be honest, who are not of their nationality. And what's always kind of funny, you really can't make this up, because any one of them was put to be deported back to Mexico. The flag they're flying so prominently, they'd scream and kick and shout, "Oh, no, please, not that." But I thought you loved it. Why are you flying the flag? You don't want to go back there. Because again, this is economic exploitation. The peso's value to the dollar. Obviously, our money carries a lot more weight there. This is an economic zone to exploit, for them to take advantage of, sending this money through remittances, billions a year. Mexico loves this. That's why Mexico does the best they can to keep the border open. And ultimately, as I described a few weeks ago, it's our jobs and our quality of life that is impacted by this, while Mexico gets all of the rewards. And these people have no gratitude, I mean, as you can clearly see. And then what's really funny is when they bring the argument that this is really their land and this land is stolen from them. And this again shows, they have this kind of conqueror mindset. But this argument is elementary as it gets, because if you research where the vast majority of these people's ancestral lineages, it's with the Aztec Empire. They are Aztecs. What did Aztecs do? They stole people's land. They captured tribes. They enslaved them. They ripped their hearts out to their pagan gods. I mean, getting moral advice or listening to moral recommendations from this group of people is like the Islamic equivalent of getting moral advice from Abu Lahab or Abu Jahl. I mean, it's like really the nerve of these people to talk about stolen land when their entire history has been nothing but bloody human sacrifice, paganism, and all kinds of other, just disgusting actions, Not saying that all of them nowadays subscribe to that, but they do take quite pride in this ancestral history. We also saw this week more fallout from the Salwan Mamika, issue. We talked about him in the opening last week. He was killed, the Quran burning guy. That's what he wanted to be known as. And you had Christian streamers. And one of the kind of themes tonight we're going to be talking about is what I call a grift. It's a known term in the online world. A grift is a way you use an angle to obtain money. So immediately you saw the Christian apologists and the lot were using this as a grift for their followers to donate money to them, saying, well, they killed Salwan Mamika, they're coming for me. These Islamic savages are going to kill us in our homes. You need to give me money for private security. And people were giving them. I mean, 30, 60,000 donations I saw on one guy. I'm not going to name him. I don't want to bring any traffic to his vulgar message, but over $30,000 raised for private security from the Islamic savages, as they like to call us. And just to show how disingenuous these people are, I saw them in one video. I watched it last Saturday night as I was laying down to go to sleep. And they were talking about our morality and how horrible we are. And they cited a study basically that was showing that the vast majority of Muslims did not find any sorrow in the Salwa and Mamaka attack. I know I'm one of them, even though they didn't ask me, but I'm still one of them. And they said, oh, how heartless they are. They didn't care that this man was killed. They didn't care about this. Muslims are evil, the usual shtick that you hear. But I want to ask them, anyone who's watching who's not a Muslim, this particular question here. If your mother had died of cancer, and every day or week there was a man that went to the gravesite of your mother and had a picture of her and was burning that picture in front of your mother's grave, and then one day he got shot and killed, would you care? I think we know the answer to that. And that's what this man was doing. He made a living out of going to us, going to our masjids, where brothers were going to pray and burning the Qurans there, knowing how hurtful this is and offensive, but yet he chose to do it. And then they have the audacity to come after us and say that we are crazy savages, that we didn't cry for this man. I mean, it's really, when you put things in its proper perspective, you really can understand, what's going on here, how, this is dealing with people's emotions. And another thing to point out to these people as well, if any of them are listening, you never see Muslims engaged in this behavior. Now, obviously, there's a crazy here and there, but collectively speaking, I can't recall in my 14 years of following this amazing deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ever seeing a Muslim go to a church and burn a Bible, day after day after day, and make a career out of this. We don't even see Muslims in the Middle East burning the Hindu text. We don't see Muslims engaged in this type of behavior. They're only doing it to us and then getting angry, basically, when we get angry at them for demeaning our religion, demeaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, demeaning the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's just, their hypocrisy knows no bounds. And I want to make sure to point that out, how they don't seem to have a problem with burning our books and doing all these things, but yet criticize us for being angry when they go to our places and our holy months, our sacred times of year, and do these activities. In other news that you won't hear from the Democratic Muslims that are out there, Muslim 2.0, heavy focus tonight on the Democratic Party following Muslims. It's going to be a big focus tonight. The U.S. aid organization was temporarily, at least hopefully, shut down for good. And you saw all the Ilhan Omars and the Rashida Tlaibs, the so-called sisters in Islam, who are anything but, along with the rest of the Democrats and the liberals, just crying foul over this. And they talked about the starving children and all the things that this USAID was supposedly helping. We're going to look at some of the things and see what our tax dollars were doing, how our tax dollars were being used. This garbage of an organization funded by us. So let's see. $2.5 million for diversity, exclusion, or environment and inclusion in Serbia. I mean, that's obviously money laundering there. I mean, they don't have an issue of diversity in Serbia. Serbia is a pretty, homogeneous, society. We saw $70,000 given for a DEI Irish musical. I didn't even realize such a thing existed. We got $32,000 spent on a transgendered comic book in Peru. Now, I like to read a lot, but I can't say I've ever read or heard of a transgendered comic book to even know what the storyline would be and such thing like that. We saw $47,000 spent on a transgendered opera in Colombia. Again, something else that no clue. Imagine what they could do in our communities with just this money here alone. $2 million spent by this organization on sex change operations in Guatemala. $20 million for an Iraq Sesame Street show. Now, anyone who's familiar with what Sesame Street's marketing to our children in this country, needless to say, what they were doing, the propagandizing of those Iraqi children, slipping in LGBTQ messages, slipping in other destructive things to their beliefs there. Slowly, like I talked about last week, you get the children. They're not worried about the adults. You got to get them young. There's $2 million right there. So we know what that was being produced. Also, this organization was responsible for distributing the COVID vaccines. I recommend anyone to do their homework on those. This was a military operation. We still don't know the full extent and damage that these vaccines, the ones that were real, a lot of them were fake. But a lot of these vaccines have sterilized turbo cancers, heart issues. Numerous problems have come with that. They were distributing these. They also, something we talk about tonight, religious organizations. So U.S. aid was funding religious organizations to make sure they promoted, and I quote, religious freedom and, keyword, pluralism. When you hear pluralism, you know what that means. Everything is equal. This is the multicultural. As I mentioned earlier, the culture that sacrifices human beings and rips their hearts out and openly practices slavery is equal to the Islamic culture. It's equal to even Western Christian culture in this pluralism view. So what they're doing here is these religious groups, you take the money, but you gotta promote basically pluralism. There's no difference between the faiths. We're all brothers in God. No, some of us are right, some of us are on a right path, and some of us are wrong. Another fun thing I saw was a school in Pakistan that they built with this money. Nothing wrong with building schools in Pakistan, but the price tag was 158 million taxpayer dollars. Needless to say, after looking at the school, me and a couple of guys from the neighborhood of the masjid could have probably done this for 100,000. And again, it was listed as a climate-friendly school, so that pretty much is how it works. It's money laundering. Someone over there contributed to multiple politicians. They gave $158 million of our check to them. They pipelined the money back. They probably took out of that $100 million in their pocket. They contracted it down and down and down to what was left for the Pakistani school was what? Probably, $1 million at most, but the looks of this school much less than that. And this is being done again in our name with our money. Money laundering, funding transgenderism and homosexuality around the world. And what we're going to kind of theme tonight on religious organizations, which going back last week to the RAND Corporation, I gave those 4 bullet points, which we're going to do a refresher on tonight and see exactly where this goes. Bill Gates was upset about this. There's too many people in the world. But then at the same time, he said during COVID, he didn't want to see one death. One death was too many, but yet he's on stage countless times talking about sterilizing people around the world, particularly in Africa, the third world. Sterilizing them how? With what? Vaccines. That's his shtick. Genetically modified foods and vaccines is what this man does. He was against the closing of this program, saying excessive deaths are going to come. I guess if you don't read the transgender comic book that was put out in Peru, somebody may be so heartbroken they would die. So what a joke. A total joke. And lastly, we look at Donald Trump's thing here today. So Trump has done some good things, as we talked about a few weeks ago when I first came back to the platform about a month ago, that, again, trusting either of these parties was to our detriment. Because at the end of the day, you're going to get the Zionists. It doesn't matter if Kamala was in there, if Trump was in there. But with Trump, you would get a little bit better things domestically, but you're still going to get the genocide in Gaza. You're still going to get all the stuff right here, which is where Donald Trump announced that the U.S. plans to take over Gaza, and they want to turn into the Riviera of the Middle East. They want to open hotels and gambling, God knows what else, obviously, pretty much Dubai 2.0 there in Gaza, and Netanyahu smirking right there next to him, because again, this was all part of the plan all along. If you watch my Palestine series, when Sister Layla put up the Greater Israel map, it was always about getting those people out of there and making the conditions so unbearable that they will accept any solution to alleviate their misery. But our Palestinian brothers and sisters have shown tremendous resolve, and they haven't backed down. But now plans are for Spain and Ireland. They're trying to work out deals in North Africa, just trying to clear these people out to then turn their lands into hotels and a playground for the rich, because the weather there, from what I've heard, I've never personally visited, is quite beautiful. It's a very nice climate the majority of the year, and it's ripe for these type of opportunities. And that was something that's been in the works for quite some time. So that was kind of the news headline. So now we're turning to part 2 of Muslim 2.0. I don't know how many parts exactly. We're going to do a couple just here called Made in America and show the little bit differences between how this is being implemented based on the Rand Corporation's agenda opposed to what we saw last week in Saudi Arabia. Heavily focused tonight on good old-fashioned racism, because this is one, as you are going to see, a big plan of theirs to divide us through this trap. So as we covered again, the way of doing it in the Gulf, they had to build everything from the ground up. The West had already been well on its way to degeneracy. Getting people to accept the lewd behavior, the promiscuous behaviors, the half-naked women, all the other things that you see in this society was already there. With Saudi, they had to condition them, over time. Here, basically, unlike Saudi, the governments don't stop religious speakers from speaking. In Saudi, anyone that condemned all this stuff would be shut down immediately. We saw this with several prominent imams who were holding the true Islamic position disappearing, being locked up. But in America, free speech reigns. Free speech is godlike in this society. The approaches are a little bit different. Some of the system was already in place. They had to go in and infiltrate the Muslim community. So let's revisit the Rand Corporation. The U.S. government, here's the quote, should make an explicit decision to help build moderate Muslim networks and link these efforts to overall U.S. strategy and programs. Build the networks and then do what? Link them to U.S. strategy. Partners should be those who adhere. This is going to be the key one tonight. Key dimensions of the democratic culture, aka let's steer these Muslims into the Democratic Party. This is where you're going to see it all going. Initial effort should focus on a core group of reliable partners and expand from there. We have seen this, and we'll talk about this over the next few weeks. And then last week, what we discussed was the fourth point, which is an effort should be made to promote the flow of the moderate ideas to the Middle East from the Muslim communities in Europe, Turkey, Southeast Asia, and other quote-unquote open societies. So they want to make this stuff eventually spread to the Middle East as well and further destabilize the deen and the religious practices of the Muslim communities there. So last week, again, was point 4 for the Middle East only. Tonight, we're going to focus mainly on point 2, which is engaging in the democratic culture. You'll never see a lecture during election time where these imams and these religious leaders are encouraging you to vote. They're taking pictures with certain candidates. We're going to introduce you to one of those candidates tonight and what he stood for, if you're not familiar with him, and encouraging us to believe in this system, to believe this system is going to work for us and further cement our own demise. So we covered last year, before I had left for a hiatus, we went and talked about the left's infiltration of Islam. It's not something new. You can, again, go back and see how these imams and Muslim speakers have gradually guided this new Muslim community here to leftist ideology, piece by piece. We are going to see the racial component of this tonight as well as the LGBTQ. So when you have a massive number of immigrants, anytime they're moving to a new country, they're naturally going to feel alienation, especially if the country is not like the culture they're a part of or they left behind. So one of the tricks is to weaponize these immigrants groups against the host population by instilling a victim mentality, which benefits the elite and the controllers. That's going to be, again, the big focus of tonight, is how exactly they are making this succeed with flying colors. You give the immigrants a boogeyman of sorts, something to hate and despise, which again is going to be that host population. In the case of America, it is foundational Americans. In a lot of cases, African Americans, particularly white, Americans, bear the brunt of this resentment as they're being guided. In Europe, it's purely the European people. So what happens then? The host population gets angry. Why are they coming to my country to hate me? You came here and then you cursed me the second you arrived. Automatically, you've got major division. Automatically, those people are going to turn on the religion of these newcomers. They are not going, then of course you have a media more than happy to bash Islam for them to help this process out. I personally, in my own country, get dirty looks by some of these newcomers, and I can see the resentment they have toward me. This is the only home I have, as we talked about a few weeks ago. Where are we to go if you're your despised enemy in your own society, in your own culture, by people that your government has brought in and then strategically has got them to hate you and has weaponized them against you? And one of the main tricks that they're employing, and I see this all over the Muslim community, and I'll share my personal story with it here in a second, is this white privilege nonsense. So I want to start off by stating, unless you're African American and you are of slave descent, you have no right to complain about white privilege. We're going to get to that one here further in a minute. The ancestors of these slaves did not choose to come to the United States of America. They did not get the support that the white Americans, we're also going to come to that later as well, and what type of support they did not get upon their liberation. These people have that right. You know, they did not choose this. Destiny brought them here, and the government gave them a raw deal. If I move to Pakistan, to India, to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, or any of these countries, it's their country. If I went there and started complaining that they have more wealth than me, when I went and I lived in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi people obviously had establishments. There were famous tribes. They occupied top positions. They had all the wealth in the country. Did I sit there and say, this is racist, this Saudi privilege? Did I start trying to come to my new land that I was living in and curse the people? Absolutely not. Anyone who went to Pakistan, Pakistanis are going to control the majority of the wealth in those countries. If you go to China, you are going to see the same thing. But only in this are these immigrants telling me that I have some kind of a privilege over them because we have generational wealth, which my family, obviously, I didn't come from that background, but there are some who did. It, again, is ridiculous. No right to say anything unless you're a slave. You came to our country, immigrated here to complain, and these people just need to, quite honestly, shut their mouths or go home. The slaves were freed. They were given nothing. They spent all of their lives in this country working for nothing. They didn't get taught how to read and write. All these things were denied from them. They never had an opportunity to grow post-slavery period. They were made promises that were never kept. You know, they never had a chance to create this generational wealth that a lot of the white Americans, except for the poor, you know, had been able to achieve. They were at a huge disadvantage. These so-called migrants and modern race hustlers are trying to piggyback basically off of the suffering of someone else. An unfortunate chapter, you know, in American history. We know nothing to people who've been here for centuries and whether we have an advantage over them or not. Too bad. It's just the reality of any country. When you immigrate, you are going to start off at the bottom. This is not should be a point of division, but yet we're seeing this being brought in to the masjids. And again, I noticed this over the last few years. It was so bad for me that I took a gap from this program from about December until September. Almost a year I was gone. And I reached out to Layla, I think it was August of last year, said I'm ready to come back. I had done a lot of soul searching during that period of time because of what happened to me here in my own masjid in my own city on this issue. And I was just very, you know, disgusted. I wanted to just maintain a private relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Islam is about community. Community is a heavy part of what makes us different. What makes us together is taking care of each other and unifying with each other. So it began here for me when I noticed this getting really bad. There was a pro-Palestinian rally immediately following the October, obviously, tragedy that happened in 2023. And because I had done a lot of stuff with Sheikh Ibrahim and on this platform, I was asked to basically take part in this, to speak at the rally. And I was honored. I had my speech already ready and everything. And, it was about a week away and I was ready to go. And then I got a call from one of my friends that said they've hired a guy. And I said, who? And he gave me the guy's name, and I looked him up, and it was a guy of Indian descent, immigrant, first generation. And he was all over the internet. He was basically nothing more than a leftist agitator. And he immediately tried to turn this Palestinian issue and war crimes, horrible, horrendous, semi-genocide that was taking place, and turn this into an indictment on who? The Zionists? No. On white Americans and white privilege. He also was interjecting the unity that was needed between the Muslims and the LGBTQ, saying that they're all brothers under the oppression of the white American majority. So at that point, I knew who he was. I knew who he stood for. I wanted nothing, to do with this. As I said to one of the brothers, for starters, what do white Americans have to do with what the Zionists are doing? Ask any Zionist. Do they define themselves as white or even European for that matter? It's just obvious what it is, but it was another Trojan horse to use a tragedy that was going on that should unify us and cause a division, between Muslims on the basis of race, weaponizing this, turning the Muslim community against the white American Christian community, who has nothing to do with this. Most of them are uneducated about what's going on in Israel. All they know is what their pastor is telling them on Sunday, that you have to support, the Jews, to love Jesus. They don't really know their Bible because that's clearly not the message there, but that's what they're being taught. And instead of this being a powerful opportunity to reach out to those people, bring them into the fold of Islam, bring them into the family, we've got people like this cursing them and blaming them and trying to paint this again as a racial issue. Well, when I expressed my concerns, the masjid chose this gentleman over me. Long story short, they didn't respect the views of myself or numerous others. I was the most vocal, about this. I've only been in that masjid twice, since that period of time. Once, and both of them, were to see people that I did have a relationship to. So at that point, I kind of pulled myself, back. Then in the fall of this year, I decided I was going to come back. Why? Because of what I saw happening. I saw basically what was going on in the election cycle. You had imams out there posing for pictures and marketing basically Jill Stein and her running mate, who I'm going to introduce you to tonight if you're not familiar with him, a gentleman that goes by the name of Butch Ware. And I'm like, here we go again, but it's on steroids this time. It's even worse, than I could ever imagine. Jill Stein, I knew who she was. Butch Ware, I can't say I did. We'll get to him in a second. But they presented themselves to the Muslim community as an alternative to the Democratic Party. They were unique. But let's see how different really they are when we look at the platform. If you research or know anything about Jill Stein, her entire message on her website was clear as day. Women's liberation. And they try to tie that with the women's liberation of Islam, but we know when it comes from these people, their definition of women's lib versus ours are completely different. It's filled with feminism, all this female empowerment, which is destroying the family, breaking up the fabric of society, one strike already. LGBTQ everywhere. Trans rights, gay rights, sex change approvals, all these things. Different than the Democrats? So far, I'm not seeing it. Phony climate agenda. Go if anyone's got time, just look into that, what a farce that is. This is all about lowering our quality of life, destroying our living standards. They've never proved. They used to claim when I was still in school that Florida was going to be under the ocean by 2012. I think Florida is still there. In fact, you can look at lighthouse pictures from the 1800s, and you can see the sea levels literally exactly the same. Literally exactly the same. No difference. They claim we were all going to be underwater. The coast were going to be redone. If we didn't do what? Get taxed, right? That's the way to fix the earth, is tax me. Make my quality of life harder. Tax my utilities. Tax my car. All this is communism. This is pure evil. It has nothing to do with, the Muslim community by any means. She also put in, of course, white male hate, identifying white males as the ultimate oppressors, the ultimate boogeyman, again, going back earlier, the ultimate figure that should receive your scorn or your disdain. And because she said, free Palestine, it's all halal. And this is one of the weapons, again, they use us. Free Palestine, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, let's welcome her into the mosque. Let's welcome her running mate into the mosque. Let's listen to what they have to say. It doesn't matter what your position is. You can be an atheist. You can be, a Hindu. You can be a Sikh. You can be a Christian, Muslim, or Jew. If you look at the Palestinian situation and side with the Zionists, you're just morally wrong. I hope in my 9 hours that we did the Palestinian situation, the history, I made a pretty good case internationally, not even mentioning the Quran and the Sunnah, just a case internationally, how evil, wretched, filthy this whole occupation was, how illegal by their own rules and standards this was. So just telling me free Palestine is not enough to endear you to me. That just means you have common sense. But that doesn't mean morally, spiritually, and culturally we all agree. But one of their tricks, again, is to say Salam Alaikum or say Free Palestine, and then you see Alhamdulillah, and they'll put this woman, and you saw all the people in Dearborn, Michigan with her shirts and all these things. And she had a secret weapon, as well. She had a Muslim, in name only at least. Some of his beliefs I would not consider to be Islamic, as we're about to expose here. I spent about an hour looking this gentleman up when I first heard his name. I was like, who is this guy? Because I don't pay much attention to Jill Stein. She knows she has no chance of winning. All she's doing is grifting. It's all campaign donations that line their pockets, and they make a killing. Her staff makes their salaries. It's all that. They know they have no chance of winning. Like I showed, their message, how is it any different, between the message of the Democratic Party versus their message? None at all. So I spent about a half an hour looking this gentleman up. And needless to say, it was exactly as I suspected. And let's get again to the masjid and let's meet who these imams were telling you to vote for. This is a quote. He's got it on his Instagram. These are his direct words, not mine. I am neither pro-life abortion, banner, in proper English here for a doctor, kind of shocking, nor transphobe. So he's neither a pro-life abortion banner. He doesn't want to ban it. He's not a transphobe. I believe firmly in the sacred dignity of every human being. It's a buzzword. It's emotion. Oh, the sinners, the filth, this, and that. They're human beings, human rights, all these type of things. They're going to try to turn into an emotional issue. It saddens me to have to announce this because I've never in public or private taken a position against women's right to choose. We're going to get to that one. Fun term there. Or against the rights of the LGBTQ, trans communities, and the lives they choose to live. Direct quote. So first, before we again go back into that, what this really is, I love when they say a woman's right to choose. It just sounds so nice, doesn't it? Like in Islam, we give a woman a right to choose. Yes, who she wants to marry. That's natural. That's humane. That's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The woman can say, I do not want to marry this guy. Before in the past, she had to. No choice if the family wanted. We give a woman a right to choose. We give a woman a right to choose whether she wants to work, and she gets to keep her money. But when they talk about a woman's right to choose, they're literally meaning murder. They're justifying murder. And this man, who's supposedly a Muslim, is out here defending and getting offended. How dare you say, I'm not for a woman's right to choose? I've never said that. Well, it's called reading the Quran. Obviously, if you're a Muslim, it should be a banner position. It's a default position. So again, what if I walk up to some guy and stab him in front of me while he's standing in the line? Is that my right to choose? Do we have a right to just choose to murder someone? Absolutely, we do. But we also have a right to bear the consequences of society and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, this guy's saying, oh, the colorful language of the left. Another sign of Muslim 2.0. They will use the left's terminology on us. They will use the left's emotion on us to suck us into deviant thinking. So, well, Mr. Ware, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also pretty clear in the Quran that killing babies is a grave sin. I recommend him reading the book of Allah, which he professes to believe. Again, we're not using the language of the left here, and we're not going to allow them to get away with it. One of the first things the Prophet ﷺ stopped was the infanticide. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this multiple times in the Quran about do never kill your child out of fear of hunger or poverty. We have the famous ayah that talks about, what the girl from the grave will ask for what she was killed. What crime did she commit? It is wrong. It is haram to kill babies, but yet here it is, Muslim 2.0. It's a default position now because we are again marrying us, or these leaders are trying to marry us to the left. Recently, it came out also in defense of those good old illegals that we were talking about. All this, again, straight out of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. I didn't see any real difference here. He claimed that solidarity with the illegals was what they most fear. Who are they? When you look at the rest of his Instagram, I think you know exactly who they are. It's talking about forming a racial coalition pretty much against white Americans. If you spend a few minutes, again, like I mentioned, you will see that pretty clear. He constantly refers to white supremacy, white racism, consistently invoking slavery and the deeds of a tiny elite, the same elite we're going to look at here in a minute, and placing that burden on all white people. Well, I've got some facts for him and his ilk. I'll ask anyone, what percentage of white American population during the times of slavery actually owned slaves? Well, the Confederacy, which was the southern states who openly embraced slavery, it was what a war obviously was one of the many reasons was fought. You found basically a total population of 5,582,222. Out of that, 316,632 owned slaves. So about 5.67%. It will go basically on to the United States. So you were bringing in the freed states of the North and the new territories in the Midwest. It's less than 1% of the white American population at that time was involved in the slave practice of owning slaves, demeaning them, taking away their dignity and their humanity. This is not a widespread problem. Really, if you look at the stats and compare it to now, the same people that control all the wealth now pretty much controlled all the wealth back then. We're going to get more to that later. But Mr. Ware, I want to ask him a question. What percentage of Jews during this same time period owned slaves? He's not going to talk about that. Of course not. Because who's over there? His running mate, Jill Stein, obviously, is of that ethnic persuasion. 40%, in fact, over. I've seen studies that say as high as 45 to 50%. But we're going to be generous here for the sake of the tale, whatnot, that over 40% were of Jews owned slaves. So almost half, by the most generous of numbers, owned slaves. So you're seeing a huge problem. But is he saying that basically there's Jewish supremacy in the United States? Is he saying that there was a Jewish involvement in the slave trade? No. If we're going to talk about this dark chapter in our history, we need to be historical. We need to be fair. We need to look at the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. White people pretty much in this country over this issue have been bashed with guilt over something they had little to nothing to do with. When I was growing up, I felt tremendous guilt for this until I looked at the numbers and I learned the history and saw the same people, again, oppressing us now are the people that were oppressing these African slaves during the period of time. The only thing they've done is change their methods and approaches. Slavery has always been a system of the elite, disproportionately administered by Jews, from the ship owners, the cargo collectors, all of them. The traders in Africa, predominantly Jews, disproportionately speaking, based, especially when you look at how low Jews were in terms of numbers in comparison. For them to be this overrepresented is a pretty serious sign. But every race on this planet has enslaved someone else at one point in time. And again, to just simply put this type of hateful rhetoric as a Muslim on one group of people only, you can go look at the slave history in China and the brutality there. You can look at the slave history throughout Europe to their own people, to Africa to their own people, to the Middle East. It goes on and on to South America, as I mentioned, earlier. But America never really gets credit as one of the first to outlaw this. The same thing as in Europe. But he also makes sure to defend the nationality, as I mentioned, of her. He says all the time in his tweets and his quotes, please stop referring to her as a Jew or as of that group. She's better than that. She's not worthy of that title. So you want to defend your running mate, but you have no problem throwing all of us under the bus. Because this type of hateful rhetoric gets people attacked and killed. And it should not be tolerated in any form. It's misleading. It's part of dividing and conquer strategy. Islam sticks up for all groups of people. We are here to call injustices wherever we find them and stick up for people regardless of their nationality, their race, or their religion. And again, if you're an immigrant or an African American, you're already having all day from the Zionist media that we're here to oppress you. Now you have the Islamic community and the intellectuals are saying the exact things, same things to these immigrants, to the Muslim community, to people like myself, which is just, again, completely just disgusting and disingenuous. These elites, as an example, have been tricking whites and mistreating us for centuries. If you look, before there was Africans, there were the peasants in Europe. There were the Irish. There were others. Do these people ever talk about that? Do they need a history lesson also on what happened with the African slave trade with the Arab community? They never want to talk about that. It's always been about, for the elite, getting people to do work and enslaved for them. To do all the work, they have to pay very little. We see it again now with these big contractors not wanting to hire Americans, wanting to hire the illegals. Why? So their margin. Because in their golden day, they didn't have to pay anything. They don't want to have to pay us nothing. They prefer us to work for free. This has always been how they've done this. First, it was in this country, the Irish, the indentured servants. They moved on from that system because they didn't like the fact that they could run away and blend in. So they chose the Africans because of the skin color, made it harder for them to escape. Once they got beat back on that, they couldn't enslave the Africans. What did they do? They started going to Europe, to Eastern Europe, bringing in the Italians, bringing in people from my ancestral background from Eastern Europe. Then when they started becoming Americanized and demanding more, they started then going after South America and trying to get those people to come in here. They knew that the moral issue of slavery was something they could not hold up. They had to move on, and this, of course, is when you saw those great waves of immigration. But I bet you will not hear Mr. Ware or any of these Muslim apologists and leaders who use this strategy to divide us talking again about the 6 to 10 million Africans who were enslaved by the Arabs. Truly a war crime, horrible crime. Same as what happened in the transatlantic slave trade. If we're going to have this conversation, the brush needs to be painted as humanity has a problem, not a particular group of people. It is humanity and the elites that run these societies that are to shoulder the blame for this. And when the reparations should have been paid to those African slaves upon their emancipation, it should have been done by the elites, who were basically profiting off of them. But when you see these elites, they spend so much time and effort funding this division down here, on our level. But yet when you see them mixing their group, you don't see anything. These people mix together without color. You saw with these scandals going on with P. Diddy and all of his rape parties. There was all races represented there. All the billionaires were hanging out together. They had no problem with color. You see what happened in Epstein Island. Will Smith was there. Numerous African-American celebrities, white celebrities, Hispanic celebrities. They had no problem with racism when it came to raping and exploiting poor girls from third world countries, from Eastern Europe, from Africa, from South America. They had no problem with that. They don't have a problem. This stuff is here for us. It's here to sow division, to keep us fighting amongst ourselves and not pay attention to who's robbing us all, blind. Now, this is kind of manifested in recent times in what they call the woke movement. Again, being here to drive a wedge. And again, imagine someone who's being told their whole entire life, you're poor and oppressed because that person down the street from you is oppressing you. Not because those people in Washington or those people like Bill Gates or like the Rockefellers or like the Rothschilds, the big boys, not them. No. That guy down the street. And this grift has been used against the black community for a long time. It's been used in decades. These clowns stay in business off of the anger that they create. All they sell is anger. Anger, resentment. Hey, give me a donation. And they make a business off of this. And as we saw earlier, our federal government is funding them. Now you're seeing the Islamic imams and leaders are doing the same thing. Not all of them, but we know who they are. And if you ask any of these people for solutions to the problem of poverty, of second-class citizenship, and all these things, what do they ever offer? Absolutely nothing but hate that person and give me money. You give me money, I'll go out there and fight the battles for you. That song and dance has been going on for over 60 years straight, and not a single bit has ever come from it. So I always like to think, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when I began researching Islam, that this stuff wasn't going on, because I might have walked away before I ever read the Quran. If I started here, I was like, there's no difference between the Muslims and the Democratic Party. This is not for me. I mean, how many others have? And that's my main concern, was when people genuinely are interested in Islam, they turn on YouTube and they're seeing stuff like what Butch Ware is saying. They're seeing stuff like you're seeing all these others, saying. And again, all these major Muslim influencers either are promoting it or they're endorsing those who do. And if, again, you label an entire enemy, your people, and the root of all of your suffering, you will basically indirectly aid the elite in the agenda. Ground fighting, fighting amongst ourselves, no unity. If you notice, when Brother Malcolm X, when he was practicing the Nation of Islam, the phony Islam, the racist Islam of Elijah Muhammad, they had no problem with him. They put him on television. They platformed him. But once he went to Hajj and he went to Mecca and he saw the true Islam, and he saw whites, blacks, browns, and yellows all drinking from the same cup, eating from the same dish, hugging each other, greeting each other, smiling each other, he came back with that message. What did they do? There went all the platforming. There went all the stuff. They took him out pretty quickly after that point. They want the division. If you confront any of these people, they will simply say, oh, no, that's not what we mean. You're misunderstanding us. White privilege means, the elite, the establishment. But when you say the word white, it's different than when you say the word elite or the entitled ones. They call themselves the Illuminati. There's numerous secret society names for these people. But when you use a racial term for this, you are, again, alienating and just attacking an entire group of people. Just the other day, I saw a very powerful story where this was overcome. There was an older white man in the UK, and he was angered by hearing the Adhan. He was sick of hearing the Adhan. All he saw on YouTube, probably, and social media was, these people hate you. They're here to kill you. They want to take over your land. He went into the masjid basically to do something about it. He went in there to cuss them out, to scream, to shout. He left in an hour, and he took a shahada, alhamdulillah. I mean, he went in there and he saw something in that particular masjid. Those brothers, whoever they were, need to be praised. They welcomed him as a brother, as they should. And in an hour, this man went in there from anger, just like Umar when he went to kill the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went there with anger. He was stopped. He went back to his sisters. He had the emotional moment there. He embraced Islam the same day. Similar thing, here, the power of our message, when it's a pure message, when it's the real message, not the stuff that our elite want. Now, white people have also been, tricked and baited into anger the same way the immigrant and the African-American community by these people have. Most are not aware of this, but during the period they call antebellum meant before war in Latin. It's from about 1812 to 1861. The white and Jewish elites of the South, they were worried that the moral issues of slavery was taking hold. We saw numerous white men die, such as John Brown, to free the slaves. He was hung in Virginia for trying to lead a slave revolt to liberate the Africans. And there were a lot of white people in the South who also were feeling the same pain of these people, seeing the demeaning treatment. And the elite did not want this unity between a lower class white and the African slave. They needed to do something about it. And they took advantage of the color of their skin that they shared collectively. Hey, guys, you're like us. You're part of the club. They're different than you. We value you more than them. And there was a huge campaign to block this unity that could have developed. And that's where you started creating the classifications of white and black to put people in these boxes along these skin color, where people in Europe always refer to themselves as Irish or French or German, but now you're white. It's a club. You have a card, you're a card-carrying member. Welcome aboard, and of course, using them for their own destruction. These poor whites were quite different, obviously, than the elite, and they were welcoming this opportunity, and of course, they took the bait, unfortunately. But during the Civil War, it would be these people that ultimately would be the ones that were fighting and dying. And a lot of people falsely represent the motives of a lot of these white Southerners. When asked, why are you fighting the war? Numerous captives have told the Northern Army, they're not fighting for slavery. They didn't care about the bourgeoisie. They didn't care about the rich guys who didn't lift a rifle, in that war. They said, we're fighting because you're down here. The little bit of land that we have would be raided by the federal government. They'd steal our livestock. They'd burn our crops and all these things. That was the reason they were fighting, but they ultimately were fighting and dying for a war that had nothing to do with their best interests. Slavery did not benefit them at all. They were not loved by these elites. In the same exact way that these elites, excuse me, would demean the Africans by creating the N-word, an ultimate word to demean the value and the very nature of that soul, that human being. They would call the Southern whites white trash or redneck, all these other type of derogatory terms, mocking them. Well, you're out there in the field with them. You got the redneck. They would make fun of them and demean them and put them on a lower, level. So anytime I would hear, white Southerners or people using that word in a certain way, I would always say to them, you need to look at the origins of redneck. You need to look at the origins of how they demeaned you. The same way they demean those people, they demean you. They had no value for either of you. You should have been with them, not with them. Big, big difference. It still rings today when we see this division, and this blind hatred that's going around. And it's always how you see in modern day who fights the wars. The people that have nothing. The soldiers' salaries are very low. People who join the army, a lot of times they join because they can't even get a job. And they're over there fighting the Zionist wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, on the behest of these people who do not love them, do not care for them, do not give them anything but contempt. And it's unfortunate it's still going on today. And again, you see, if you look to every, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. As I've discussed here previously, that's where I wanted to pick up. We also see these same leaders after the race issue. Again, LGBTQ is a big thing, for them. And this was highlighted earlier when I talked about the U.S. aid. When you see in U.S. aid, all the different things, the majority of them were LGBTQ things. So we can see now that machinery that's responsible for the race hustling is also there promoting this LGBTQ. If you look at every major Muslim personality who is in government, it's going to be someone kind of saying similar things that we are going to see later. They are told, again, LGBTQ should be accepted and embraced, but we don't have to agree with it. But we should welcome them into the masjid. We should listen to them. I'll agree with that partially when it comes to helping them, correcting them, trying to help them overcome those challenges. But in no way, shape, or form should we be accepting and welcoming the lifestyle. So you have that. I mentioned the thing with the racism. And then you see on June 13th, 2016, these groups that are receiving this U.S. aid, they signed a paper called the Orlando Statement. This was in response to the gay nightclub attack, which was falsely blamed on Muslims, as usual, where a gunman went inside the nightclub and shot. And the media just ran with it. And these imams, they already had the paper, I'm sure, written. They just needed the right false flag to roll it right out there. Because later on, they found out that the guy that did the shooting, he regularly visited that bar. He knew the men in there. He had been intimate with the men, some of the men in there, and was upset about, I guess, the way they had treated him. None of my concern to go really deeper into that and the reasons why, but it had nothing to do with our religion at all. But yet here comes this beautiful document that was going to be the kind of calling card that you see these guys teaching off of. Well, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who goes into part 2 of our RAND Corporation bullet point list, he was one of the first of the moderate network. He was the main figurehead in this compassionate modern Islam that we are seeing today. And he stated, we, as American Muslims, follow the open-hearted and inclusive Islam of Muhammad Ali. That was quite interesting. That they mentioned Muhammad Ali, a former boxer, as whose Islam they follow. They didn't use the Prophet ﷺ as an example. I mean, they didn't use any of the Sahaba as an example. They say we're following the Islam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They chose a boxer to identify. Could be many reasons for that, not to speculate further, but quite interesting to say the least. And we must completely reject the hatred, provincialism, and intolerance of those who trample upon the rights of others, besmirching and defiling the name of Allah. So if you're against these people, then you're a homophobe. You're a hater. So basically, the statement is calling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an intolerant homophobe. Because anyone who's read the Quran, as most of you have, obviously, would know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment was on the cities who openly embraced and practiced this. So these guys know better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These guys know better than the Sahaba. They quoted Muhammad Ali, which I couldn't find any quotes of Muhammad Ali even saying any of these things, but they are following a tolerant, open Islam. So again, it's about getting this stuff accepted under the guise of democracy. We are now part of the United States, yes, and as visitors here in a non-Muslim country, we must respect the law. We must respect the rules out here in the secular world. No doubt about it, no disagreement. But at the same time, we are not to bring those values into our masjid. Absolutely not. And you see these boards are doing it around the country, whether it be the divisive racial messages I talked about earlier, or it's this. Next week, we are going to look at how they use social media influencers to further instill this stuff. And we're going to talk about the likes of Sneeko and more of that Muslim 2.0, how they're now getting the Muslim community to accept dating, accept other Western practices. It's okay to have friends sitting next to you on a live stream who are drinking alcohol. You know, it's okay to have two girls kissing in the back while you're supposedly speaking to a Muslim audience. You know, these things are fine. You know, Muslim 2.0 is not against it. You know, and I hope tonight we can kind of really get a lot of things accomplished in your minds. To understand who's funding them, we established that. U.S. aid has given these organizations and these groups untold amounts. This is just 1 year. We're talking some examples. Imagine doing that times 20. How many billions of dollars they have spent making sure that the right people are in these positions to guide you to the deviant path. We've seen how they spread racism. They get their candidates, they package their democracy and their values. Here's white race, anti-white racism. Here is a woman's right to choose, openly condoning abortion. We've seen the LGBTQ slipped in there. We see how they slipped feminism, you know, in there as well to get us to embrace the Western incarnation, you know, of feminism, which has ruined their birth rates, has ruined their families. 70% of the divorces in this country are instigated by women due to the female empowerment messages that are taught by these feminists. And we see them just smiling. All of our imams coming in there and posing with this man and all the hateful stuff that he's got. Another thing that was interesting he had on his platform was he was for what they call community policing. This is, again, a liberal Black Lives Matter talking point of letting the community, you know, police these areas, police all areas in general. But it's quite funny. I've talked about the corruption, the police departments. That's a whole story for a different time. Obviously, it's something that we need to look into. It's obviously something that has to change. This harms us all. But to say basically that you need community policing and to abolish the police, turning over these neighborhoods to the drug dealers and the pimps would be much, much worse than even having the corrupt police departments that we have now. And this is not an Islamic message. Law and order is essential to Islam. The kuffar always, one of their top criticisms against Islam is our Sharia. Oh, you're too strict. Your punishments are barbaric, they like to say. But now you have a supposed Muslim calling for complete abolishment, you know, of the police and getting welcomed into the masjids to spread this message. So, yes, I'll close there. Next week, again, social media influencers, introducing deviancy on a whole new platform and stage, further changing the culture of this vulnerable youth that grow up in the United States of America, alienated, don't speak the language well when they first come here, don't fit in school. You know, they're looking for anything to identify with, to kind of mix the Western temptations they're seeing every day over here, and then their traditional family culture of Islam. And these influencers fit that bill perfectly to introducing you to the new package 2.0 Muslim version. All right, Sister Layla, we can have questions.
Okay, here's a question or comment. Let me read it from one of the brothers. He said, I agree with you totally, everything you said. He said, and you are right about how they promoted this Stein person and her running mate. He said, do you think that perhaps we are too weak as a nation because so many famous personalities, and no disrespect to Sister Layla's website, but even from Sister Layla's website, were promoting voting for this LGBTQ woman. I'm not saying you, Sister Layla, so don't bark at me. He said, but do you think perhaps the problem is we let our emotions get in the way of our practice with Allah? Please comment.
Oh, absolutely. And these people are the masters, as I hope I conveyed pretty well tonight, of capturing emotion and taking advantage of that. They know that the Muslim community, especially in the West, doesn't have any real role models in prominent positions. We have none. And we're dying for a role model. We're dying for someone who's a leader in a prominent position. And because of that, they'll accept, like for Ilhan Omar, so many sisters who come from Somalia or from other areas, they identify with. There's someone who looks like me. There's nothing wrong. So that person looks like me. She's wearing the hijab. She's from a Muslim background. She has the name. And they blindly went and voted for her. And then you look at what's happened, what she's promoted. With the Palestinian communities, you see the people flock to this Rashida Tlaib, getting the same thing. They were dying to have someone who looked like them with an Arabic name or a name that they related to in a government position. With Jill Stein, it was really just confusing to me. But after I talked about what had happened the year before with me in the masjid, it was like, oh, okay, it's just this widespread now because Jill Stein is not someone who looks like the average Muslim. Jill Stein is basically a Jew. I mean, obviously, she's a non-practicing atheist, it seems. And her platform, again, was filled with this stuff. It's like all you had to do was look at the bullet points. You didn't even have to read any details of what her platform was. It was this LGBTQ, this, feminism, that, white people, evil here, the typical grift. And I was shocked. And I didn't know who Butch Ware was until I saw him on a picture with a Muslim in the masjid. And I was like, well, I got to look this guy up. And he was like the next vice president of the United States. So I assumed he was with Jill Stein. And because I knew he wasn't obviously with Kamala or Trump. And that's how I was able to find him. And once I saw him, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I expected. Talking point 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like every single thing of the Democratic Party was there. The only difference was they said, those guys won't do it. We will do it. We need a real Green New Deal. No, we don't. Fossil fuels are not fossil fuels. That was a lie. They're natural material generating in the earth. It's a renewable energy. We are not damaging the planet. Now, do we have a garbage problem? Yes. Do we have a problem with chemicals being leaked in the environment by these factories? Yes. But are we causing the planet's climate to change? Absolutely not. It's never been proven. All this is a slippery slope leading you to poverty, where they ration electricity because you're being good for the climate, good for the earth. It is a cult that they are promoting. And it was just, again, no surprise that we saw this. And then, yeah, like I said, all the stuff that he was quoted. He's a Muslim. He's like ashamed. Don't dare say that I'm not pro-choice. Well, you should read the Quran, right, brother? I would think you would. And I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not for a woman's right to choose when it comes to an unborn baby. It's a great responsibility Allah has blessed women with to carry those children and to take care of them and nurture them. And that bond is betrayed when you have an abortion. And it's haram. And there's no way any fatwa from any liberal university can say otherwise.
Okay, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. Brother Yusuf. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Alaikum salam.
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation, actually. It was packed with a lot of information that I feel that the average American doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things that you were talking about. I used to be heavy into reading social economic books, and one of my favorite authors is Thomas Sowell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard of him.
I know who he is. Yeah, not read any of his books cover to cover, but I am familiar with him. Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote a book. I think it was entitled "Black Rednecks and White Liberals," and a lot of the things you were talking about when it comes to the slavery, when it comes and mind you, this is an African American. For those that are not aware of Thomas Sowell, he is one of the actually one of the leading social economists in America. He was well known for his knowledge on those issues. And a lot of the issues and the things you were talking about, he spoke about directly in this book. I mean, he was on point. But the thing is, a lot of African Americans don't even know who he is. They don't even know who he is, what he is. You know, what's being given to the African American community are a lot of liberal African Americans, right, with those agendas that a lot of those policies have hurt African Americans in this country. But it just, yeah, just the things that you were talking about reminded me of Thomas Sowell and some of his comments as to how African Americans have gotten to this situation. And I think that I wouldn't, I'm not, if whoever want to read his books, that's fine. There are things that I
think we lost you, brother.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying there's some things I wouldn't read, and there's information that he wrote I would ignore that would go against my Islamic conscience, and that's with any unbeliever or books that they write. But when he sticks to the political situation and the climate of our society, when he sticks to the issues that cause the problems that we have in American culture, how African Americans' culture derived and where it derived from, I think he's on point. And you can see that when you compare history as to where we are today. So I just wanted to let you know, I mean, a lot of the stuff you were saying, most of it, about 95% of it, I agreed with in terms of those issues. And I appreciate that there is someone that is actually talking about that. And I think that's very beneficial for a lot of people to learn and know about, and then go do their own research, so that they can get a better understanding themselves.
Absolutely. If you look at the position of the Black community in this country in 1965, how many children were born in wedlock with both the husband and the mother present in the home, and then you compare it to now, you can find a lot of key factors that drove this. One of them is obviously the introduction of crack cocaine and drugs into the Black community, which was done by the CIA. This is known. They denied it for years. It's pretty much a known fact now. And liberalism. It's like both of them have, now you pretty much have a message that if you're a young Black kid growing up in the inner city, if you're not a rapper or a basketball player, you don't have a life, or a drug dealer, you don't have a life. And it's quite unfortunate. And the race hustlers in that community have been able to whip the victimhood up and, telling these people that the opportunities that are out there don't exist when they do exist. And it's another way of mind control. And in the white community, we have our own that are directly targeted with us. And it breaks my heart, really angered me when I was seeing these newly arrived Arab Muslim immigrants using the same rhetoric as the race hustlers have been using in this country for decades. Now bringing this stuff into the Muslim community, especially if you're someone who came here, as I mentioned in the opening, who didn't choose, you chose to come here. You have no right to criticize and demean a people for having more generational wealth than you do if you're a newly arrived immigrant. I could never go into any of their countries and make those claims. And it's just, again, a wedge issue designed purposely to divide us and to tear us apart.